The 14th of October, 1983. Midwestern State University Library, Circulation Records Office. Margaret Ellis supervised the circulation ledger at the University Library in Ohio in 1983. The case identity phrase, later used in internal notes, was the routing discrepancy, and the circulation log was the record that showed it. At 3:42 p.m., according to the stamped return ledger, a copy of Soviet Industrial Planning 1965, 1975 was checked in through the main desk. The entry appeared routine. The book had been borrowed 9 days earlier by a graduate research assistant in the political science department. Inside the back cover, however, the borrower slip carried a return stamp dated October 13. The ink color matched the previous day's stamp pad, not the one used on October 14. Under library procedure, mismatched return dates required notation before the shift could close. The discrepancy had to be reconciled in the weekly inventory summary. Within the first review, Margaret marked the margin of the ledger with a small pencil bracket. She did not change the entry. She wrote "Verify routing" beside the call number. Under University Policy for Restricted Foreign Policy Materials, unresolved routing entries were flagged for supervisor awareness. Such entries were typically reviewed at the next audit cycle, if not corrected by end of day. Margaret worked the mid-afternoon reconciliation period every weekday. Between 2:30 and 4:30 p.m., she balanced intake carts against the day's log sheets, confirmed date stamps, and cleared minor mismatches. The process was repetitive. Most irregularities were caused by hurried desk clerks who stamped the wrong line or misread a borrower card. This one remained open because the physical stamp did not align with the ledger time. Midwestern State's library had designated a portion of its Cold War holdings translated Soviet economic and military doctrine volumes as limited circulation materials. They were not classified, but they were tracked more closely than general collection titles. Circulation policy required accurate routing documentation in case of interlibrary audit or federal inquiry. The graduate assistant listed on the October 5 checkout entry had no prior irregularities. His borrower history showed standard semester research activity. No fines, no lost materials. By 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the records office closed the ledger for the day, the routing discrepancy was still unresolved. Margaret initialed the margin and carried the ledger to the supervisor's inbox for notation. The supervisor would either clear it as clerical error or carry it forward into the weekly review sheet. Entries of this type were routinely revisited during monthly inventory checks. At that stage, the matter involved one date stamp and one 9-day loan interval. The book was returned to the Cold War section before closing. The ledger remained open. During the fall semester of 1983, Margaret Ellis followed a consistent schedule. She arrived on campus shortly after 8 a.m., usually on the same commuter train that reached the downtown station at 7:32. From there, she walked 3 blocks to the university library, entered through the staff door, and signed the circulation log before the public counters opened at 8:30. Her responsibilities were defined by sequence. Morning intake began with the overnight book drop. Volumes collected from the exterior return slot were stacked on a gray metal cart and rolled to the processing table. Each book was opened, borrower slip checked, and date stamp verified against the previous day's ledger entries. If a stamp was faint or misaligned, she compared it to the shift sheet to confirm which clerk had been assigned to returns. Most discrepancies were minor. A clerk might forget to advance the date wheel. A borrower might return a book minutes after closing, leading to a next day stamp. In those cases, Margaret wrote a short notation in pencil and cleared the line before the noon reconciliation. On Thursdays, she conducted a shelf audit of the Foreign Policy and Comparative Systems section on the 3rd floor. The Cold War holdings occupied 2 narrow rows along the interior wall. Titles included translated Soviet planning reports, Warsaw Pact economic summaries, and English language analyses published by U.S. academic presses. Circulation cards were kept in a small drawer behind a desk, sorted by call number. The copy of Soviet Industrial Planning 1965, 1975 that carried the routing discrepancy was reshelved on the Thursday following its return. Margaret confirmed its placement herself. The call number aligned. The borrower card was returned to its slot. Over the next 2 weeks, Her routine did not change. She balanced ledgers mid-morning and again before closing. She noted one lost periodical and two overdue reserve items. The October 14 routing discrepancy remained listed on the weekly summary sheet, awaiting supervisor clearance. At home, her habits were similarly regular. She kept a small spiral notebook on the kitchen counter where she recorded train times, grocery lists, and occasional reminders about staff meetings. On October 20, a brief entry read, "Verify Oct 14, return still open." The note was not formal documentation. It was a reminder to check whether the supervisor had closed the ledger line. By late October, no correction had been entered. The ledger margin still showed her pencil bracket beside the October 14 entry. The supervisor had neither erased nor initialed it. In circulation terms, an unresolved line did not halt operations. Books continued moving. Students checked out materials before midterms. Faculty requested interlibrary loans. The Cold War section saw moderate use, typical for a semester with several international relations courses. Still, Margaret began pulling the weekly routing sheet each Friday before leaving for the 5:10 train. She checked whether the October 14 line had been cleared. It had not. The matter remained procedural. One book, one date stamp, one open notation in the ledger. By early November, that would change. On the 3rd of November 1983, another volume from the same Cold War section appeared on the afternoon intake cart. The title was Foundations of Soviet Military Logistics, Translated Edition. The borrower card showed a checkout date of October 25. The ledger recorded its return at 4:18 p.m. that day, 8 days later. The interval was slightly shorter than the standard 2-week academic loan, but still within policy. The discrepancy was similar to the October case. The interior borrower slip carried a return stamp dated November 2. The ink tone matched the previous evening's stamp pad, not the afternoon of November 3. Margaret compared the stamp against the shift sheet posted beside the desk. The clerk assigned to the November 2 closing shift had initialed the sheet at 9:02 p.m., the official closing time. The physical book had not been processed until the following afternoon. Under procedure, after-hours returns deposited in the exterior slot were collected at opening and stamped with the previous business date if returned before midnight. That policy had been clarified in a memo earlier that year to prevent fine disputes. In this instance, however, the ledger showed a live desk check-in at 4:18 p.m., not an overnight drop. Margaret pulled the October 14 ledger page from the file drawer and placed it beside the November 3 entry. 2 books. 2 return stamps dated 1 day earlier than the ledger check-in. Both titles from the Soviet holdings shelf. Both loan periods shorter than departmental norms. She did not escalate the matter. She added a second pencil bracket in the margin and wrote, "Routing discrepancy verified" beside the new call number. The following week, a third title appeared. On November 11 at 3:27 p.m., according to the circulation ledger, Economic Directives of the USSR 1978 edition was processed at the main desk. The borrower history showed checkout on November 2, 9 days. Again, the physical stamp inside the back cover read November 10, 3 books within 4 weeks, each from the same 2 shelving rows, each showing a return stamp 1 day earlier than the ledger entry. Margaret reviewed the access pattern on the borrower cards. The same graduate research assistant appeared on 2 of the 3 entries. The third listed a visiting scholar affiliated with the engineering department, recorded as a temporary borrower under faculty sponsorship. Short loan intervals were not uncommon near midterms, but the pattern of 1-day routing gaps was unusual. If books were placed in the overnight slot before midnight, they should have been logged the next morning with matching dates. If they were returned at the desk, the interior stamp and ledger time should align. By mid-November, 3 unresolved lines remained open in the weekly routing sheet. Margaret copied the call numbers into her small kitchen notebook that evening. Beneath a grocery list and a reminder about the Thursday audit, she did not record theories, only numbers. The ledger entries continued to stand without supervisor notation. By late November 1983, the routing discrepancy had expanded from a single margin note to a small cluster of unresolved entries in the weekly sheet. Margaret began with the inventory forms. Each Friday, before the 5 p.m. internal close, she printed a section-by-section circulation summary. The Cold War holdings were grouped under a separate heading because of prior audit recommendations. The three titles, Soviet Industrial Planning, Foundations of Soviet Military Logistics, and Economic Directives of the USSR, now appeared within a 5-week window, each marked with a penciled bracket in her hand. She retrieved the physical volumes again during the Thursday shelf audit on November 17. The books showed no obvious damage. Page edges were clean, no torn slips. But in Economic Directives of the USSR, she noticed a faint pencil mark along the outer margin of page 143. It was not a library marking. It was light and erasable, positioned beside a paragraph heading. Margaret noted the page number on a routing worksheet. She did not remove the book from circulation. Later that afternoon, she reviewed the shelving assistant's shift notes. According to a typed memo dated November 12, the assistant had reshelved Foundations of Soviet Military Logistics twice in the same week after finding it left on a reading table near closing. The memo did not identify the reader. It recorded only that the book had been left unattended in the foreign policy aisle at approximately 8:50 p.m., 10 minutes before close. That detail did not violate policy. Students often consulted materials briefly without checking them out. Still, the recurrence of the same call number in different notes drew her attention. Margaret next examined the exterior Dropbox collection sheet. The overnight slot was emptied each weekday at 8:15 a.m., and the collector signed the sheet with time of retrieval. On November 3, the sheet showed the collector's initials and the notation 8:17 a.m. 3 vols. No titles were listed there. Individual books were processed at the desk. The November 10 collection sheet recorded 8:16 a.m. 2 vols. Again, no title specified. None of the three disputed returns had been logged as overnight slot items in the ledger. Each showed an afternoon desk time. That was the point of inconsistency. Margaret prepared a short internal memo dated the 21st of November, 1983. It listed the three call numbers, the mismatched dates, and the shorter-than-average loan intervals. She attached photocopies of the borrower cards. The memo did not propose explanation. It requested clarification of routing procedure for the Cold War section. Under circulation protocol, repeated documentation inconsistencies in limited circulation materials were subject to supervisor review and, if unresolved, referral to the University Security Office. The memo was placed in the supervisor's inbox before Thanksgiving recess. The ledger remained open. By December 1983, Margaret Ellis's routing file at Midwestern State University still carried 3 unresolved circulation discrepancies in the Cold War section, each tied to the same narrow range of Soviet titles. The supervisor responded to her November 21 memo with a short handwritten note. Confirm whether desk processing error or after-hours return pattern. No further instruction was given. Margaret began comparing loan intervals across the entire foreign policy shelf. She pulled circulation cards for 12 additional titles, randomly selected from adjacent call numbers, and calculated average loan duration for the semester. Most ranged from 14 to 21 days. Faculty loans extended longer. Undergraduate loans sometimes ran the full period before renewal. The 3 disputed volumes averaged 9 days. That difference alone did not violate policy, but the pattern repeated across multiple entries. On December 20, Advir Zes PM. A 4th title was logged at the desk, Soviet Regional Economic Administration. The borrower card again listed the same graduate research assistant. Checkout date, November 23. Return interval, 9 days. The interior borrower slip showed a return stamp dated December 1. Margaret opened the book before shelving it. On page 212, a light pencil line appeared beside a statistical table. On page 87, another faint mark aligned with a subsection header. Neither mark damaged the page. Both were easily erased. She pulled the previous 3 volumes and examined the marked pages again. In Economic Directives of the USSR, the earlier noted page 143 marking corresponded to a paragraph discussing allocation schedules. In Soviet Industrial Planning, a faint crease aligned with a section header listing quarterly output figures. Individually, these details were minor. Together, they formed a repeated structure. Short borrow interval, 1-day routing discrepancy, isolated page markings in numerically ordered chapters. Margaret copied the marked page numbers onto a legal pad kept beneath the circulation desk. She did not attempt interpretation. She recorded only the numbers and dates. Under library policy, recurring irregularities involving limited circulation foreign materials could be referred to the University Security Office if documentation suggested non-standard use patterns. The threshold was not clearly defined. It relied on administrative judgment. By mid-December, 4 ledger lines remained open. No supervisor clearance had been entered. The weekly routing sheet showed the same bracketed entries carried forward. Margaret prepared a second memo on December 14, attaching the list of page numbers and noting the consistent 9-day loan cycle. She did not characterize the marks. She described them as repeated marginal notations, aligned to statistical sections. The memo concluded with a single line: request guidance on continued monitoring. The routing discrepancy was no longer isolated to one book. Winter break reduced foot traffic through the library, but the circulation desk remained open on limited hours through late December 1983. Margaret Ellis used a slower schedule to review prior semester's routing summaries. On December 19, she received a brief reply from the University Security Office. The memo, dated December 16, acknowledged receipt of her documentation and requested copies of the exterior Dropbox collection sheets for the dates corresponding to the 4 disputed returns. It did not state a conclusion. Margaret retrieved the sheets from October 13, November 2, November 10, and December 1. Each showed morning collection times between 8:15 and 8:20 a.m. signed by the assigned staff member. None listed titles. That level of detail was not standard practice. The Security Office followed with a second memo on the 4th of January 1984, asking whether the books in question had ever been processed directly at the desk after 8:30 p.m. near closing. Margaret reviewed the shift sheets. The closing clerk on November 2 had initialed the sheet at 9:02 p.m., consistent with routine lockup. No notation indicated late desk processing for the disputed titles. On January 12, at 3:51 p.m., another Soviet volume was checked in. Agricultural Output Planning in the USSR. Checkout date, January 3, return interval, 9 days. The interior stamp read January 11. Margaret documented the 5th instance and attached it to the open routing file. By then, the pattern was no longer confined to one borrower. The January 3 checkout listed the visiting scholar previously noted in the ledger. The graduate assistant did not appear on that card. 2 borrowers. 5 volumes. Repeated 9-day intervals. Repeated 1-day routing gaps. On January 18, the University Security Office requested after-hours access records for the exterior return area. The library's side entrance, where the drop slot was located, required a staff key after 10 p.m., but the slot itself remained accessible from the exterior sidewalk at all hours. No access card system was installed at that time. However, the internal logbook for nightly security rounds recorded times when campus officers passed the building. According to the campus patrol log dated December 1, an officer noted, "Library exterior secure at 11:14 p.m. The same phrasing appeared on November 10 at 11:09 p.m. The log did not list individuals present. It confirmed only that the exterior doors were locked. The security office compiled the loan intervals and page numbers Margaret had recorded. In a typed summary dated the 26th of January 1984, the office noted that the marked pages across 5 volumes corresponded to tables and subsection numbers that, when listed sequentially by loan date, formed a numeric pattern. The memo did not interpret meaning. It described alignment. The pattern required confirmation from an external agency with expertise in coded communication. Margaret's role did not expand. She continued documenting returns, stamping dates, and balancing ledgers. The routing discrepancy file, now several pages thick, remained in the supervisor's cabinet pending further instruction. By February 1984, Margaret Ellis's routing file at Midwestern State University remained open under Security Office review regarding the routing discrepancy in the Soviet holdings. On February 3, a liaison officer from the Regional Federal Investigative Service met with the University Security Office in a closed administrative session. Margaret was not present. According to the Security Office memorandum summarizing the meeting, the compiled page numbers from the 5 marked volumes were compared against a reference index maintained by the federal desk. The memo stated that similar numeric extraction methods had been documented in other academic institutions between 1982 and 1984. In those cases, page numbers and table headings from publicly available translated volumes were used to transmit prearranged sequences without altering the books in permanent ways. No conclusion was recorded about intent. The memo noted only that the borrow-return intervals and page alignments were consistent with previously identified structured reference patterns. On February 9, the graduate research assistant was asked to attend an administrative interview in the university security office. The meeting was scheduled at 2:15 p.m., according to the appointment log. The summary of the interview indicated that the assistant described his research as focused on comparative industrial allocation systems. He acknowledged borrowing the listed volumes, but did not provide explanation for the shortened intervals or marginal pencil marks. He denied leaving books in the aisle near closing. The visiting scholar departed the United States on the 18th of February 1984. The university's international office recorded the exit date in its standard travel compliance file. No hold was placed on departure. On February 22, the University Security Office issued an internal directive authorizing limited monitoring of circulation activity in the Cold War section. The directive required photocopying borrower cards for specific call numbers and retaining overnight Dropbox sheets for 30 days instead of the standard 7. Margaret was informed only that additional documentation was required for certain volumes. She was not briefed on the federal memo. Her task remained procedural. Copy the cards, maintain the ledger, attach sheets to the routing file. No arrest occurred on campus. No public notice was issued. On March 12, the Graduate Assistance Funding Review Committee issued a standard annual evaluation. The committee's summary, filed in departmental records, stated that renewal of research funding was not recommended due to administrative considerations. No further detail appeared in the file accessible to the library. By late March, circulation of the previously marked volumes decreased. The 9-day intervals did not repeat during the monitoring period. No additional marginal pencil marks were documented in the subsequent 4 weeks. The routing discrepancy file was forwarded to the Regional Federal Desk on the 4th of April 1984, under a cover sheet labeled Reference Pattern Comparison. A copy remained in the University Security Office archive. Margaret removed her original pencil brackets from the active ledger once instructed that the file had been transferred. The lines remained in photocopy. The book stayed on the shelf. In April 1984, the University Security Office closed its active review of the library matter without issuing a public finding. The routing discrepancy file remained classified internally as a records issue tied to limited circulation holdings, and the library returned to standard processing rules. Margaret Ellis continued working the circulation ledger through the end of the semester. The additional documentation directive, photocopying borrower cards for specified call numbers and retaining Dropbox sheets for 30 days, expired in early May. The security office did not renew it. The graduate research assistant completed the spring term but did not return to the same position the following academic year. Departmental records show the funding non-renewal decision dated the 12th of March 1984, and the assistant student employment clearance for the research office was not reissued for the fall roster. There was no formal disciplinary notation in the library file. In the circulation history, his borrower card remained active like any other student record until expiration. The visiting scholar's name appeared once more in the university's compliance file, confirming departure on the 18th of February 1984 and closure of the temporary borrower sponsorship. No further library holds were recorded. After that date, his name did not reappear in campus circulation ledgers. For Margaret, the immediate consequences were practical. During the summer of 1984, the library revised its handling of the exterior return slot. A procedural bulletin instructed staff to stamp after-hours returns with the actual processing date and note overnight slot on the ledger line, even if returned before midnight. The change was framed as audit clarity. It reduced date mismatches but created longer entries in the daily log. The routing discrepancy itself remained in the archive as a closed file. Copies of borrower cards, the page number worksheet, and the security office memos were stored under a general limited circulation review heading. Margaret's original pencil brackets survived only in photocopies. Years later, In a declassified summary of regional counterintelligence coordination from the early 1980s, the Midwestern State University library file was cited as one of several campus cases involving structured reference patterns using publicly available translated Soviet materials. The summary did not identify individual subjects by name. It described the method in procedural terms. Repeated short loan intervals, minimal page marking, and routing inconsistencies that created a recoverable sequence when records were assembled. In later files from the same office, similar mismatches appeared again. The library never issued a public statement about the events of 1983, 1984. The books remained in the collection, recatalogued under updated subject headings in the 1990s, and the Cold War shelf audits continued as routine work. The case persisted only in the way the office handled anomalies, a margin note taken seriously, a routing sheet carried forward, and an institutional file that connected one quiet records problem to a broader pattern documented elsewhere.